Hi there, and welcome to the Creative Operations Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Groom, and in this podcast, we'll be talking with creative operations leaders in all kinds of industries, from franchising to finance, from healthcare to hospitality and beyond. We'll be looking to uncover best practices and to see trends that are coming to help you keep your creative operations on brand and on budget at the same time. Enjoy. Hey, welcome everybody to this episode of the Creative Operations Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Groom, and today it's actually an honor and a privilege to have with us Gary Ritkes. He's a founder of Sprout Loud, member of the senior management team there, and has just a boatload of experience, both in technology, marketing technology, and all the technologies that brought us to what we now think of today as MarTech. So Gary, thank you for joining us. Really wonderful to have you here.
Kevin, it's my honor. Thank you. I greatly appreciate it. This is I love these things. They're so fun, and if we can bestow any information on folks out in the marketplace of how things used to be or what things are coming in the future, I'm all in. Count me in.
That sounds great. So, guys, today what we're going to talk about a little bit is just exactly what Gary was talking about, sort of a broader context about how marketing operations really grew up out of pre-press and has introduced all sorts of notes and technology categories to it, from DAM to MDF and the new world of MDF as opposed to the world as we used to know it decades ago, and everything in between. So Gary, what we like to start with on this podcast is just to give you the opportunity to grab the mic and tell us a little bit about how you got into creative operations in the first place and how it turned into things you didn't quite expect.
Well, it sure has. That's for sure. So thanks, Kevin. So I actually started by sweeping floors in a print shop when I was about 14 years old. And it was fantastic because what happened was the owner of that print shop would leave at 5 o'clock every day, and they had a second shift running, and all of the individual operators, the guys that were making the plates, the guys that were stripping the film to burn the plates, to put it onto the printing presses, to do anything in bindery, all these operators would leave at 5 o'clock. Well, actually, they would go on lunch break, starting when the owner would leave. So what happened, here I am sweeping the floors of this place. And next thing I know, each operator is coming to me and saying, I want to go on my lunch break. Can you do this for me? And they would show me how to operate a machine. So that was the genesis of how I learned about the world of printing and publishing and creative operations. So fast forward a couple of years, and I actually wound up going to school at Ritkes for business, but my mom was working for the NAPL, National Association of Printers and Lithographers, and she was very friendly with a guy that owned a company called Interstate Printing, a guy by the name of Bob Rose, and he's still out there today, a mentor of mine. Hey, Bob, love the guy. And he said, Gary, I've noticed that you're doing driving and you're bringing all these flats and these proofs out to all of our clients, and this was in Jersey, so it was a lot of the pharma companies. And I keep hearing from my production team that when you're going out and delivering packages, you're coming back with more work. He said, I really think you might have the opportunity to go into this business and learn sales in the printing industry. And so he said, I want to suggest that you go up to Rochester Institute of Technology. So I went up there and I learned really the foundation of print management science, color theory, and which ultimately got me really, really interested in the technology part of graphic communications. So I started learning from the ground up there as to how files were created. It was at the time when Adobe was coming into to play. We had old programs like Quark, and InDesign was not even there yet. PageMaker was one of those files. And what I was learning for the theoretical part at school, they really weren't doing in the industry yet. So when I came out into the industry and I wound up working for a big pre-press company, actually a typesetting company, which later it was Kodak Graphics, and they merged with PPI, and that became AGT, Applied Graphics Technology. So I was working with, and my job was to go out to the big publishers and catalogers in New York City, as well as the ad agencies. And we would be, selling them linotype output. And then they would be pasting that up, all stuff you're smiling. And because I know you and I both know all this stuff intimately.
I remember that. I say, baby, galleys were awesome. They were beautiful to handle, weren't they?
Yeah. They were lovely. I mean, forget about it. At least I wasn't really doing hot lead anymore. That was all in the school. So subsequently, what happened was this was a big transformation time period for the industry. And it was early 90s. Part of the client base we had were people like Newsweek and Condé Nast and McGraw-Hill, big publishers, and they needed to get out weeklies and even dailies. I remember we actually launched USA Today, and at that time we were helping them build out how to actually page fax film. So this was even before the digitization of assets could really be combined within some of those page layout programs. So my job was to really understand what those dailies, those weeklies, and even the monthly publishers, and then those big catalogers, what they had to do. The writing was on the wall. Digitization was coming. Scanning was going to be, a thing of the past where you were scanning imagery, artwork, transparencies, converting that into digital images, and then ultimately combining that into a page layout program. So my job was to go out and help these folks to design workflows of how do they take these assets now, which just lived on a hard drive. And I'm sure you remember thumb drives and walking around from computer to computer to literally move files around. And that's what we did in those days, right? And, we had a thumb drive that could hold 100 megabytes, which was literally, if you were lucky, 2 pages of an ad, right? We've come so far. So really what we were doing was going out and looking at operations and workflows and start adopting technology. So it was when scanning came out, it was when page layout came out, and then there were composition engines that were brought out, those SciTech systems and all those other pre-press systems. But in that era was when the concept of DAMs came out, right? Digital asset management systems. And that, I think, was the pivotal moment for the entire graphic communication industry, was how you can start working with these files and using them within different programs. So the page layout programs, the retouching programs, put them all together and then ultimately have that film output, which only lasted for a couple of years, right? We're dating ourselves. Maybe it lasted 10, 15 years. Yeah. And then we immediately got out of all of that output, and then it was direct to plate. So really the creative operations and those departments, they grew up so much, and people, that are just coming into the industry today, or maybe in the industry for about 5 years, there's really no information, no one place you can go to really understand all the things that you and I practiced and preached for so many years. And actually it was a service. So overnight, you and I witnessed several industries actually go by the wayside. Yeah. Right? Yep. And we're seeing that continue today in terms of how technology evolves and provides automation in at the workplace. So it's been amazing to watch. I enjoy it every day. And, some of the challenges that it presents and that I see in it, it's so interesting. Even talking to a big telecommunications company just last week, when you think about the output that comes from all of these inputs and how it's being managed and how it morphs into how do you get print output and where does print fit into the mix today? I know we're going to talk on that a little bit, but I was on the call with several folks and questions were coming up. Well, the color didn't really match 100%. So I had to go and explain why digital proofing and inkjet proofing doesn't really match what comes off in an offset environment, right? and how we're building color on a printing press that's maybe running 3,000 feet a minute, and we're laying down dots that are basically translucent to give us a representation of a color image, right?
A humidity level that may actually affect your color.
Yeah, how's the paper? Is it porous? Is it not?
Yes,
what grade is it?
Exactly.
How much knot gain am I getting on that press sheet? Yeah. How much packing do I have in my blanket? All these things that nobody has any clue ever existed. Yeah. are really, some of it still exists, obviously, with the printing press, but a lot of these theories, a lot of these concepts, and then which brings you to, well, I have some clients that won't even look at hard copy proofs anymore. They're fine with what comes off the printing press. You have to remember who your audience is at the end of the day, right? And when we talk about where does print fit in and who that audience is, when I'm a consumer at my house, I get one piece in the mail. So I'm not fanning it out across a table as a print production person looking to see if I have consistency between my run, at every hour on the pull to make sure that my flesh tones look great on this piece and look great on the next piece, or the product itself matches with the exact color, right? Forget about it. We can go into so many conversations about product color matching on whether you're doing PMSs or reproduction in CMYK, right? So there's areas there we could go down, but we'll leave that off. But the reason why I'm trying to bring this as a point to illustrate is that so much has progressed in the technology, and that, believe it or not, the consumers, the people that are buying services from you and I, the outputs, the print that might be associated with it, it's not so much about that individual piece and the quality of that piece or the entire job. Is it pleasing color? Does it look good? Does the message resonate with the consumer? And are they acting on that piece that they're getting in their mailbox, right? And they're not looking at it, well, this green didn't look exactly like the green I thought it was going to be. I think the age of the digital age today has gotten us into an area where good enough color is good enough. Maybe not for the executive boardroom when they're showing an annual report, right? Maybe there's a little bit more that goes into it when I'm doing catalog work and somebody is buying from a printed catalog. So they need to see that color exactly, right? Yep. And they're going to get hard copy proofs. But I think we have come to an age now where a digital representation on the screen using workflow and collaboration tools to create these assets and then to proof these assets are becoming the norm of everything that we work with.
It's such a great point. When you talk about knowing your audience and knowing what the ultimate destination is going to be, if you really can allow for some greater tolerance than we used to think about, I have a loop right here. I haven't used the loop in forever, right? So it's knowing your audience and then adjusting yourself to that audience and adjusting your workflow to ultimately where you're producing is super. It's common sense as we speak about it, but it takes folks by surprise. And we've often seen workflows get stymied and companies get slowed because there's kind of a bottleneck in their workflow where somebody's applying a level of stringency that probably isn't appropriate to the need. And so really being sensitive to that requires, especially for young folks coming up, it means having a context for what does it mean for what we used to do? What does it mean when we still need to do that occasionally? And how do we not do that when we don't? So that's super. I want to give a shout out to your alma mater too, right? Rutgers is running a great program in DAM. I know you're down in Florida now, so maybe you don't see it, but Frank DiCarlo and a bunch of guys are, I believe, running a program just on DAM. It's a certificate in DAM, and it just started up at Rutgers. So, we're moving along. We're moving along.
Well, you mentioned Frank. I haven't talked to Frank in years, but, the other person that comes to mind then would be David Zwang, who was just such an amazing, amazing guy in the industry. Yeah. Always looked at David as a mentor of mine. And then brings me back to another guy, Murray Oles, who goes way back. He actually has a DAM system called Chalix now. And Murray and I worked on building out the first digital asset management system at AGT, and we installed it at Amex down on Vesey Street back in the early 90s. Yep. And this was when DAM wasn't an industry yet.
Not yet.
It brings back memories. Compendium Protection, that was the name of the product, and it was great. It was great to see how we could help these creative operations evolve, and there were so many folks in the ad agencies and within these creative departments that were so interested in technology, but the technology needed to catch up to where they wanted it to be, right? They were hungry for it. I remember, and boy, well, thank you for sharing that. It brings back great memories. Well, I'm going to look into it.
I knew this was going to be a good conversation, so I'm going to fast forward it because, of course, when we're talking to millennials, all those folks who think of the world began in the 2000s, which for them, of course, it did, and that's all great. I want to bring us fast forward up there. So MarTech. You guys are in the MarTech space. You know it inside and out. You probably have in your mind Scott Brinker's kind of, graphic, his landscape of 7,000 different companies. So this creates a real challenge for folks. How do you know how much of this software do you really need? And how do you really focus in and make sure you don't have too much? Because software is kind of like the human brain, right? We use 6% of it and 94% of it is left unused. So I wanted to just throw that out to you. It's what I call the shiny objects problem. What are your thoughts about that? You're in a creative operation. Maybe you're an in-house agency. Maybe you're an external. Maybe you're an agency of record. How do you build a MarTech stack without going after the latest shiny object, but making sure that you're staying current? What's your thoughts on that?
Such a great topic. We could spend hours on this.
Could.
I think it really all comes down to what are you trying? What is your goal? I think there has to be really strong rigor within the creative teams, within the management of those teams, the openness to collaborate and discuss what are the end goals that we are trying to achieve, and then breaking it down from there. When do we want to achieve it? And kind of reverse engineer the whole process. You are right. There are so many different types of technologies available and so many different instances within the whole creative workflow environment, right? You have marketing technologies, you have creative technologies, you have storage technologies, you have funding technologies, you have data technologies. How are you going to manage this data, put it together? How are you going to enhance data? How are you going to overlay it with third-party data? You have so many different things to be considering. So for me, I always boil it down to, and this is what I work on with my teams, is what is our end goal and what are we thinking about? And then how do we MVP that down to be, what are the real true parts of that package, that technology, that MarTech stack, or that sales enablement stack, or that creative operations stack that we really want to achieve? Who are going to be my end users of those stacks? And how are they going to be trained up? Who are the right vendors? So listen, you got G2, you have a bunch of different types of review sites. What I have found, and they're good, and then you have the analyst community as well. What I have found is they're too broad. They're always too broad. I have fought for years with the analysts on try to really hone in on how you're looking at this space, because what I don't want to do, and I've always said to them, is you're sending people off in a broad universe and then you're leaving it up to them to try and figure out how they filter through those different things, but they're not apples to apples. Yeah. So it's a big challenge. Some of them have listened and have honed in a little bit clearer, but I think it all comes back to that use case. And then with that use case, you always have to have budget in mind. Because if you don't have approved budget, or you're at least some round numbers, all of this is for naught. You need to be aligned with senior leadership. You need to know what budget is in place for you to eventually build out what you need to build out. You're also going to find, and we've run up against this, I'm sure you have as well, where people are going to challenge you and they're going to say, we think we're going to do this in-house. And we have the resources. Most people are coming around now that SaaS has really taken on a much bigger role in all of our environments, that most of them are not going to build it. However, in some highly regulated industries, there are still some folks that say, we know what the use case is, we can build this. And gosh, Kevin, if I tell you how many times this has happened where they have spent millions of dollars in budgetary numbers where, I could have charged them 10%, 15%, 25%, and they would have been 90% of the way there already, right? Yeah. So it comes back to a strong team, understanding budget, understanding where you want to get to, and then looking at what is going to satisfy what you need. So you talk about shiny objects, right? What's one of the shiny objects today in MarTech, in sales enablement, in anything that has to do with creating assets and then getting them out to prospective buyer, right? Because we're trying to get, whether it's going to be in a B2B world or whether it's in a consumer environment, a B2B2C world, right? So I think of one shiny object that has been going on for the last couple of years, and I'll refer to ABM, right? Account marketing, right? And a whole industry has been created on that. Well, I had a Rolodex when I started out. I called on 10 people when I started out, all at the same company. Mm-hmm. I understood what their requirements were and what they were trying to do. So you and I have been executing account-based marketing for years. Yeah. Technology has started to come up with a couple of the players in the space. But again, that becomes very confusing. So I'm always going to go back to what is it that you're trying to achieve? And I am executing account-based marketing, but I'm not using a platform. I'm looking for intent signals. So I'm grabbing a single point solution that's going to satisfy my need. And the moral of the story and what I'm getting at for you with shiny objects is, to me, the real shiny object right now is open architecture and integrations. And it's not a single type of solution that's in the marketplace, but it is, how do you make sure that you are working in an open environment with the technology that you need to deploy and you have found to be relevant for solving your use cases? And then how are you going to get them to talk together? How do you evaluate a technology enough where they're going to have compliance in place, they're going to have security in place, the data requirements in place, the standards in place? And then how do you make sure that you're going to be able to make those things talk together to create your desired outcome? And that's really, when I think of, I could talk about TikTok being the latest in advertising shiny objects at the consumer level. But I really think it needs to be thought of in a more broad sense. When you think about Brinker's 7,000, MarTech solutions, right? Again, evaluate those top providers. And one other point I wanted to get back to, sorry, that I didn't make on the analysts and presenting firms to you. Just because there are 10 or 20 firms in a wave doesn't mean that those are the only players, right? You really, and I say this because, and you could be in any position of the wave, but if you have that one solution that is needed for that one brand and you're best at that part, and they're saying you're good at it, it's in the wave, well, I'm going to go to that technology even if you are not in the leader category. Mm-hmm. And I think too many procurement departments get involved on behalf of creative operations and creative organizations and determine who should be in the conversation. And I could talk to you for hours on how I think the whole RFP process is broken when evaluating and determining those things, but we'll leave that for another podcast.
Yes, well, we've got multiple podcasts coming, Gary. I just want you to know.
Yeah, we can leave that one alone. But again, I think to boil it back down, to really bring value to your listeners today is just because you have people in a wave, or you're seeing top people that have paid for ad placement in G2 or there's another one, I forget the other main one out there. Don't necessarily think that is the only 5 people you should be talking to. Yeah. You need to go under the hood, and you really need to evaluate. And last thing I'll say to that is, to me, it's not just about the references and the quotes that you see on those review sites. It's find those several vendors that can be meaningful for you, and then tell them to present you with the very, very similar use case that they solved for somebody else. And that's the person you want to talk to. And then you get to understand what's under the hood. Can they deliver on the promises they said? Yeah. Will the integrations work the way they claim those integrations would work? Yeah. What are the success metrics you put in place and that you're monitoring to make sure that you are successful? And then once you do launch, how do you go through that whole onboarding to make sure that you're executing with the technology that you're bringing and it meets to the standards that you bought?
It's great realism, in terms of DAM and integrations. We've seen the whole DAM category moving to an API-first architecture, right? Thinking of the DAM from its very beginning as a servant to other applications. And that was, we watched that entire industry mature from the mid-'90s, early '90s, as you were describing it, to today. And now, folks understand it. The folks in the DAM community understand that API-first is the way to go. But the customer is probably, in terms of terminology, probably 5 to 10 years behind us, right? Yeah, and about to learn a lot of painful lessons, the hardest way of all, which is to implement something and find out it doesn't quite meet your needs, and spend, forget the money. Think about the time that you spent and the time you spent with your local marketers, whoever those local marketers would be. So it's clear to me that and I hope you'll come back because this is really, really fun stuff. I'm going to throw one more question out to you. We try to keep this under 30 minutes, but this one can go long and with good effect. But I wanted to throw out to you, you guys work a lot at Sprout Lab with local marketers. We do too. I wanted you've talked a lot about how somebody who's building this creative operations workflow is assembling it, architecting it. I wanted you to spend a little bit about time on the folks who are at the very end of that value chain, out there in the field, who don't know these terms, who don't really, think about analysts, wouldn't know Forrester from a hole in the wall. And by the way, everybody, when Gary mentions waves, he's talking about the Forrester wave and the magic quadrant at Gartner, these magic sort of items that don't necessarily need to rule your decision making. So beware. Use them, but beware, right? Make your own decisions. But when you think about that local marketer, Gary, what is he or she, that person who's running a shop? It could be a tire shop. It could be a restaurant. It could be a retail location of any kind. What do they need from this technology? What are the things that move them in your view? And how can we best serve them?
Such a great question. You're always going to have different levels of end users. Some of the younger end users who are very, very comfortable with technology are going to jump in head first, and they're going to be your power users. You also have to look at the size of the shop, right? What are the resources they have internally? Who is the person that's actually going to be executing their marketing? If you're dealing with a tire dealership, for example, there might be 15 people employed there. You got one owner, his wife is doing the books, and maybe one of his kids is helping out with the marketing. Yep. At the end of and then you could go conversely, you have a 30-person shop, and they've actually put some resources into a person that's going to help in sales and help in marketing, might have some experience. So what we've learned along all of these years is you have to provide a solution that is able to accommodate the needs of every user level, right? And for all these varied use cases. And in addition to that, you're going to get hand raisers at the local level at these locations that are going to say, I just don't know what to do, and I don't even know where to start. Can you help me there? So overlaying a technology solution with a service component, a component that allows them more of a concierge type, well, these are your recommendations. This is what you might want to be thinking about. This is what the rest of the network is doing. This is what your competitors in another state are thinking about. This is the messaging that's resonating in that local level. You're serving a different audience, a different targeted demographic. Let's talk about that with you and how you can be successful. So at the end of the day, I like to always say, Kevin, it comes down to simplicity, right? KISS, keep it simple, stupid. And identify early on in the conversation with whoever that user is going to be that needs to get into the technology. What are they trying to accomplish? What are their goals? Have that conversation and then help facilitate that on their behalf, or let them run rogue. If they know that they're great and they know what they're doing and Facebook advertising works for them and they want to just be able to get access to their co-op dollars to split 50% of it for the brand and do a co-branded campaign at the local level, they can jump in, they can jump out, and they're done. And they don't have to worry about filing for a claim and a reimbursement. They could just pay half of it right up front and they're running their campaign. It always comes back down to that end user and what they know today and what they want to do tomorrow. And if they don't want to do any of it, do it for them.
That's awesome. We often talk. I think it was Kim Collins at Gartner years and years ago who talked about the do it with me, do it for me, let me do it on my own. Right? Those three. And so you're saying these platforms need to be able to deal with all of those scenarios, and the vendors need to be able to and need to want to embrace all three of those scenarios. Want to do it on your own? Want to have a little bit more flexibility than in those hyper, focused days of the 90s when we obsessed about color? We got to let go a little bit. But nowadays, some folks don't want us to let go at all. They want us to hold their hand every step of the way. Those are awesome. And really human insights that I think this whole community will love having. So let me bring it to a wrap there, guys, because we're almost at the half-hour level. We've used a lot of your time, Gary. It has been really fun. I hope you'll come back and join us. We'll talk more about what you guys are doing at Sprout Lab, what we're doing, what everybody's trying to do with this technology. So thanks for spending the time with us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Kevin. Always appreciate it.
Absolutely.